In this video, we're going to look at how to report the use of restrictive procedures, more specifically, the use of physical holding. Once you have selected the student and SPED forms, you will scroll down to the Restrictive Procedures section. Here there are four options: use of restrictive procedures physical holding, prone restraint, seclusion, and a form for a staff debriefing meeting. Prone restraint is no longer a legal hold, and none of the buildings in the SCRED districts have certified seclusion rooms, so I'll not be walking you through these forms. If prone restraint or seclusion are used, however, these will need to be filled out. Each time physical holding is used, the staff person who implemented or oversaw the physical hold and the student's case manager must complete the use of restrictive procedures physical holding form as soon as possible after the incident, but within 24 hours. If more than one hold was used during a prolonged behavioral episode, one form can be used to cover all of them. If more than one hold was used in a day, but they were in isolated incidents, you will need to complete the forms separately. If a hold was used on a general education student, the person implementing the hold will still need to complete this process. Let's look more closely at this specific form. First, you'll need to enter the date of the incident. The rest of the information at the top of this form should be filled out for you. Next, you will list each individual involved in the incident who either implemented or oversaw the physical holding. If you need space to list more people, simply click the Save button, and more spaces will be added to the form. The name of the person completing this form is often automatically input, but if not, this is where you would record that. The first question on this form is, was physical holding used to protect the student or others from physical injury? Per Minnesota statute, this is the only reason we can be using restrictive procedures on a student. Next, we need to describe the emergency situation. In this section, you will explain the situation that prompted the use of restrictive procedures. Again, we can only be using physical holding in emergencies. An emergency is not property destruction, no matter how significant, unless doing so may cause harm to the child. It is not hiding under a desk or table, running from staff, refusal to go to class, or noncompliance. Again, unless failing to respond would result in physical injury. Once you have described the emergency situation, you will need to describe the incident that led to the physical holding. So, for example, if I wrote above that the child found a broken piece of glass and was attempting to cut themselves with it, here I would describe the incident that led to them being in an escalated state and obtaining the glass. The next question asks for a description of the physical holding and a brief description of the student's behavioral and physical status. Here, we would want to include several things. First, the type of CPI hold used. If a CPI hold was not used, you will need to describe in detail the hold you did use so we know exactly what it looked like, and you will need to describe the reason staff did not use a certified hold. Again, if more than one hold was used during a prolonged behavioral episode, you will need to describe each of these, including the type of hold used and the approximate time and duration of each. You will also need to include the student's behavioral and physical status. This means while the student was in the hold, were they resistant, pulling, trying to get out? Did they immediately calm? Did they release muscle tension and go limp? Did they call out, cry, or yell? Next, the form asks, was physical holding the least intrusive intervention to effectively respond to the emergency? This question is prompting you to consider if there was any other proactive intervention that could have been used before we resort to putting our hands on a student. For example, if a small student is lying under a table and lifting it with their legs, and staff are afraid the table may fall on the student and cause injury, there are less restrictive measures the staff can take, such as sitting on the table to weigh it down. If physical holding was the least intrusive intervention that was appropriate for that situation, then you will click Yes. If you did click Yes, You will next need to explain why you did not, or were unable to, use a less restrictive intervention. This may either be a situation in which the proactive interventions were ineffective, or the risk of physical injury was too high to implement a proactive intervention first. For example, if a small, vulnerable student runs out of the building and into a busy street, staff will not want to spend time using visuals to redirect the student. Because physical holding is only used in emergency situations, it will likely be the case that the majority of less restrictive interventions are impractical for the situation, but be sure to clearly document this here. The next question on this form asks if physical holding ended when the threat of harm ended. So, did we let go of the student as soon as it was safe to do so? And then explain how it was determined that it was safe to release them from the hold. Usually, their behavioral or physical status will signal that they're in control of themselves again and can be released. Sometimes, a hold will end because staff can no longer safely implement the hold. This can also be described here. The last pair of questions on this form ask if staff directly observed the child during the physical hold. These questions are making sure that when a hold is being used, staff are being attentive to the safety and welfare of the student during this time, ensuring that the hold is not hurting them and that they are safe. There may be a person in an observer role while a hold is being used. Otherwise, the staff members implementing the hold will want to make sure they are focusing on the physical status of the student while they are holding him or her to fulfill that role as observer. Next, we need to record the time the hold began and ended. In cases in which more than one hold was used in a prolonged behavioral episode, you can report the time the behavioral episode began and ended. If this is the case, you need to be sure that you reported the approximate time and duration of each individual hold in the appropriate section above. The last thing we need to do on this form is to record parent notification. Anytime a physical hold is used, we need to make every effort to notify parents by phone or in person the same day. If this is not possible, they need to be notified by written or electronic notice within 2 days. The individual completing this form needs to identify the parent that was notified and the date and time they were contacted. They will then select the method of contact in the drop-down menu and can report additional details in the last box if necessary. If unable to contact the parent the same day, this is where you would indicate that contact was attempted. Now, we'll remember to click Save, and this form is complete. When you have finalized this form, you will need to notify the designated member of the Building Oversight Committee, that is, your principal or school psychologist, that a hold was used and the documentation is complete. You will then schedule a staff debriefing meeting to take place within 48 hours of the hold.